Jessica wasn't born into wealth. She'd clawed her way up from a tiny apartment in a forgotten part of town, working jobs that most would scoff at, scraping by with just enough determination to land a position at Diamond & Co., a luxury jewelry store. It was a job she'd dreamed of for years, an escape from her past. But the reality of her new position had quickly become a bitter reminder that sometimes the real struggle begins when you think you've made it. From her first day, Jessica had stood out, not for the right reasons. She lacked the polished grace of her colleagues, the warmth that luxury retail demanded. Instead, she exuded a coldness sharpened by years of hard living and bitter experiences. Her gaze was wary, her smile reluctant. The other sales staff noticed, and so did the customers. Her rigid, almost hostile demeanor quickly began to turn patrons away. One customer, a middle-aged woman in a designer coat, had asked Jessica if she could see a pair of sapphire earrings up close. Jessica's curt response and dismissive glance made the woman hesitate, and her hand hovered awkwardly as she muttered, "Never mind," before hurrying out. The next day, a young couple looking for an engagement ring had been put off by her sarcastic remarks about the store's affordable section. They left abruptly, Jessica's words ringing in their ears, and never returned. It wasn't long before complaints about Jessica began piling up in the store's records. A group of college students once came in to browse, laughing and talking excitedly among themselves. Jessica's suspicious glare and constant surveillance made them so uncomfortable that they left without buying a thing. One of them wrote a scathing online review, calling her the rudest salesperson she'd ever encountered. The store manager had called Jessica in once to address the complaints, suggesting a softer approach might help her connect better with customers. But Jessica brushed it off, citing her realism as honesty customers should appreciate. In her mind, this job was purely transactional. She was there to sell, not to make friends. Her attitude made her a lone wolf, an outsider even among her colleagues. Yet she held on to the job fiercely, more out of a desperate need to prove herself than any love for what she did. Despite the backlash, Jessica remained. She was rarely reprimanded, partly because the store was understaffed, and partly because Jessica, despite her attitude, had a way of intimidating customers into buying simply to get away from her. For every complaint, she'd managed to secure enough sales to keep herself employed. Jessica viewed every customer who walked through the door as a potential threat to her fragile position in a world she believed didn't want her. Her suspicion and coldness, however, reached a new level when a young black woman named Talia entered the store one fateful afternoon. Jessica didn't know it yet, but this encounter would bring everything she thought she knew about herself and her job crashing down around her. Jessica's sharpness wasn't just a matter of personality. It carried a bitter edge that crossed into prejudice, especially when it came to customers who didn't fit her image of true luxury buyers. The truth was that Jessica held on to deeply ingrained biases that came out in subtle but unmistakable ways, particularly towards Black customers. She'd mastered the art of maintaining superficial politeness while letting her bias seep through in the smallest gestures, a dismissive look, a patronizing tone, or a reluctance to offer assistance. One afternoon, a Black businessman had come in, dressed in a well-tailored suit, asking to see a set of cufflinks. Jessica eyed him up and down, her gaze lingering too long on his face, and then asked, "Are you sure you're in the right place?" Her tone was biting, laced with the insinuation that someone like him couldn't afford what Diamond & Co. offered. He'd raised an eyebrow, surprised but not entirely shocked. He walked out without a word, choosing to take his business elsewhere. Another incident involved a young Black woman who had come in with her mother to browse for a gift. Jessica kept a constant eye on them as they walked around, almost as if expecting them to pocket something at any moment. When the daughter reached out to touch a gold necklace, Jessica interjected, "Be careful, those aren't cheap," as though they wouldn't understand the value. The mother shot her a look of disdain, and they left without buying, muttering about the audacity of her attitude. Jessica's colleagues noticed her behavior but rarely intervened, either out of fear of conflict or because they were too busy to address her openly. Yet, the whispers about her attitude circulated around the store, growing into an unspoken acknowledgement of her prejudice. Once, a black teenager had come in looking for a simple charm for her mother, and Jessica hadn't even tried to hide her irritation. "We don't have anything in that price range," she'd said, without even bothering to check, despite there being plenty of affordable options. These incidents painted a clear picture of Jessica's outlook. She believed certain people didn't belong in a high-end store like Diamond & Co., and she never missed an opportunity to make that known. She dismissed her bias as just honesty, and no one had confronted her directly, allowing her to continue unchecked. Her prejudice wasn't just a private flaw. It had tarnished the store's reputation and alienated countless customers who had sensed her hostility and felt unwelcome. As the glass doors of Diamond & Co. slid open that afternoon, a young girl stepped in, bright-eyed and barely tall enough to see over the jewelry cases. Talia was only 9 years old, but she carried herself with a quiet curiosity and a fascination for beautiful things that seemed beyond her years. She wore a cheerful yellow dress, her small hands tucked behind her back as she marveled at the sparkling necklaces and rings displayed around her. Jessica, stationed at the counter, immediately noticed Talia. Her mouth twisted slightly as she watched the little girl wander, her eyes darting with a mix of irritation and suspicion. To Jessica, Talia was out of place, another stray in her luxury domain. "What's a child doing in a store like this?" Jessica thought, rolling her eyes. She assumed the girl must be lost or just looking for trouble. Talia moved slowly through the store, her gaze landing on a delicate silver locket in a nearby case. She tiptoed closer, enchanted by the way the light caught the pendant. With childlike innocence, she reached out, her fingertips brushing the glass, and whispered, "It's so pretty." Jessica saw this and couldn't hide her frustration. She briskly walked over to Talia, her footsteps heavy on the polished floor, and placed herself between the girl and the display. "Can I help you?" she asked sharply, her tone cold and unwelcoming. Talia, taken aback, blinked up at Jessica. "Oh, I was just looking. It's so shiny." "Looking is for customers, sweetheart," Jessica sneered, barely glancing down. "Are your parents here or are you just wasting time?" Her words cut with a kind of cruelty that most adults would recognize, but Talia only felt confused. She glanced around, almost as if expecting her dad, who was supposed to meet her soon, to walk in and make everything okay. Just then, the store door chimed, and another customer entered, momentarily distracting Jessica. Taking her chance, Talia slipped past her and gravitated toward a glimmering diamond bracelet that seemed to dance under the lights. She was mesmerized, her eyes wide, her little hand reaching out once more. Jessica turned back just in time to see Talia's fingers hover near the bracelet. Her face turned red with anger, assuming that the girl was trying to grab it. "I told you, this is not a place to play," Jessica snapped, rushing forward. Then, without thinking, Jessica grabbed Talia's wrist to yank her back. In her frustration, she let her anger slip too far. Her grip was rough, and as she pulled, Talia stumbled, losing her balance. Jessica's grip shifted to a shove, and Talia fell back onto the cold, hard floor, looking up with a mix of shock and hurt that spread across her small face. The store fell silent, and other customers turned to stare, murmuring in shock. Talia sat frozen, not understanding what had just happened or why she was being treated this way. She blinked back tears, and her hand instinctively went to the bracelet she'd only been admiring from afar. It was then that a tall, composed man stepped through the doors. He'd arrived a bit later than planned, but had kept his promise to meet his daughter at the store. Mr. Harris took in the scene before him, his daughter, humiliated and sitting on the floor, and a furious Jessica standing over her. The realization of what had just happened struck him like a blow. Jessica's face turned pale as Mr. Harris's gaze shifted from his daughter to her, narrowing with a cold, unmistakable fury. She hadn't known Talia's father owned Diamond & Co., nor that he'd just witnessed the fallout of her own prejudice. Mr. Harris's expression hardened as he walked briskly over to his daughter, helping her to her feet. His voice was low but filled with a controlled anger as he addressed Jessica. "What just happened here?" he asked, the question heavy with expectation. Jessica stammered, momentarily at a loss for words. She hadn't realized Talia was his daughter, nor that Mr. Harris would arrive at such a moment. The weight of the situation settled in, and her mouth opened and closed without a single coherent response. "Sir, I thought she shouldn't have been touching," Jessica finally managed, her voice shaky. Mr. Harris held up a hand, silencing her. He looked down at Talia, who was clutching his hand, still visibly shaken but trying to stay composed. "You thought she was what, exactly? And since when does admiring jewelry deserve this level of hostility from an employee?" His voice rose slightly, drawing the attention of the other customers, who were now openly watching, murmuring to one another. Jessica shifted on her feet, her face flushed with panic. She could feel the weight of her actions pressing down on her, and she started to stumble over her words. "I didn't mean... It was just that I thought she wasn't, here to buy," she stammered, her attempts at justification only making her sound worse. Mr. Harris took a step back, his voice calm but icy. "What I saw was you assaulting a child, my child, no less. And now you're trying to justify it." He gestured toward the door. "I've had enough complaints about your behavior toward customers, but this is beyond anything I imagined." He turned to the store manager, who had appeared and was watching with a horrified expression. "Call security." Jessica's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. She tried to appeal, her voice growing desperate. "Please, Mr. Harris, I didn't know she was your daughter. I would never have..." "Exactly!" Mr. Harris interrupted, his voice thick with disgust. "You didn't know, and that's precisely the problem. My daughter or not, every person who steps into this store deserves respect, but instead, you let your own prejudice dictate how you treat them. You've humiliated my customers and tarnished this store's reputation." Security arrived, and Mr. Harris didn't hesitate to explain the situation. Jessica tried to back away, but the guard stepped forward, blocking her exit. "Please, this isn't necessary," she pleaded, her voice nearly breaking. But Mr. Harris was resolute. "Assaulting a child is not only unforgivable, but illegal. You will face the consequences of your actions." As the security guard gently but firmly took her by the arm, the reality of her situation finally hit Jessica. She was escorted out of the store, humiliated, her face red with shame as customers looked on. Outside, local police were called to address the incident further. Jessica's treatment of Talia was officially classified as assault, and she was taken in for questioning. Her prejudice had cost her not only her job, but had also drawn the attention of authorities who would determine if charges were necessary. Back in the store, Mr. Harris knelt down to Talia's level, speaking to her gently, his voice softening for the first time since he'd walked in. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" Talia nodded, her voice small but steady. "I didn't do anything wrong, Daddy. I was just looking." He hugged her tightly, feeling both anger and relief. He looked around the store, addressing the onlookers as he spoke to the manager. "We're making some changes to our staff and policies to ensure every customer is treated with the dignity they deserve." Jessica's departure marked a turning point for Diamond & Co. Mr. Harris put new hiring standards and sensitivity training in place to prevent such incidents from ever happening again. Customers noticed, and the store's reputation slowly recovered, built anew on respect and equality. As for Talia, she left that day with her father, knowing he had protected her and that no one would ever be treated unfairly at Diamond & Co. again. In the days that followed the incident, news of Jessica's actions and her subsequent arrest spread through the city, with Diamond & Co. facing both scrutiny and praise. Some saw Mr. Harris's swift action as a powerful stand against prejudice, while others questioned how such behavior had been tolerated for so long. But for Mr. Harris, this was more than a public matter. It was deeply personal. At home, he sat down with Talia, realizing the importance of his role as both a father and a leader. He'd spent so many years focused on building his business that he'd overlooked the essential values he wanted both his store and his life to reflect. Talia, despite her young age, had helped him see things more clearly, and he wanted her to know that she'd been heard. The next week, Mr. Harris invited Talia to the store again, this time under different circumstances. When she walked in, the staff greeted her warmly, and she noticed a display case in the center of the store with a sign that read, "The Talia Collection." Inside, a small selection of jewelry shone under the lights, each piece elegant, beautiful, and named after the qualities Mr. Harris admired most in his daughter: courage, honesty, strength. He knelt beside her, explaining softly, "These are inspired by you, Talia. Every piece here will remind people of your courage and kindness, of standing up for what's right. You've taught me so much." Talia beamed, her face lighting up as she realized the impact of her simple love for beauty and fairness. And with the Talia collection, Mr. Harris's jewelry store began a new chapter. Built on more than just diamonds and luxury, it stood as a symbol of respect, inclusion, and a father's love for his daughter.